Hello, so this is going to be a video on the Polish D-08 dosimeter, or model D-08/1. Now, this is an old Polish radiation detector from the Cold War period. Now, from what I can understand, this is basically the Polish version of the Soviet DP2. However, from what I can understand from talking to Polish people about it, because the Soviets wanted Poland to pay a production license to make the DP2, they instead basically made their own version that was similar enough to fit the requirements, but didn't mean paying royalties to the Soviet Union, which was something you'd see of the DP66 and DP75 as well. So this is basically an ionisation chamber. It's not a Geiger counter, even if you see people selling these as Geiger counters online. It's an ionisation chamber, and I'll demonstrate that in the video. And unlike the DP2, it doesn't have a scary check source inside. This one used basically a system which I'll demonstrate, which is a bit clunky, of I think charging a capacitor to then overload into the unit to test it. Now, something important to point out if you're interested in getting one of these, this is the later model that's been retrofitted to take D-cell batteries. So basically has a battery compartment and three D-cell battery holders with what I think is a step-up transformer in there. I've not taken this bit apart, to actually boost the sort of 4.5 volts from 3D cells into whatever the voltage is this chamber uses. Because originally this came with a series of old obsolete batteries that were meant to be set up in tandem to power, I think, different parts of the device and the meter. So this is a similar retrofit that was done to kind of the British MD3 meters from the Mark IIs. Although with this one, it's actually the battery compartment itself that's been converted, as opposed to, you know, changes to the circuit board inside the unit. So anyway, let me just pop the batteries in. So the batteries are literally 3D cells that will go in this one. I've got them ready here, and I've freshly charged these, so they definitely work for the video, because this meter can be a bit funny with sort of how it works, which I'll demonstrate in a minute, hopefully. So the batteries go in here really tight. There's also a thing to keep them in tighter. Right, so that's all the batteries in. Then what I do is there's basically this lever bout. It's out of frame, but there's a lever bout here which stretches over. Actually, sorry, it's a rubber bout, not a lever bout. It's the same sort of concept as a trouser bout, and that stretches over to keep the batteries in place. Now if I swivel this around so you can see the back. Now, this is a bit I'll get to in a minute. That's the ionisation chamber itself. I've opened this because the original cover on here was getting a bit rusty, and I wanted to demonstrate this working in real time, which you can't do unless you've got an X-ray machine or something really scary. So I thought I'd do that. But you can hopefully see there that the battery compartment, they've basically rewired this in. So, you know, this has this 1971 dated, if that focuses on that, battery conversion compartment in there. So basically in the 70s they retrofitted these, or late 60s, whenever it was, to take D-cell batteries as opposed to, you know, the old type of battery. So as a really cool battery compartment, it's got two clasps there that basically go over and lock down. See, they're a bit rusty, a bit stiff, but there we go, that's on tight. Right, so if you want to see the original Polish operating instructions, they are here. I'll just let you look at that for a moment. I did have somebody translate these for me. Eintons translated them for me, so thank you if I'm pronouncing his name right. Now, the instructions, we're not going to follow the instructions completely. Basically, what the instructions are telling you to do is how you set it in the control mode. So you should have, I think it's the calibration, the zeroing, and the sort of power from the battery compartment to the meter all set up correctly, so it, you know, gives a correct reading for each instrument. The problem is, as this is now old and, you know, using the converted battery compartment and whatever else, lots of these things won't quite line up. But I can get the meter at least working, but I'll basically, I think, I'll try and demonstrate how, in theory, this should be set up. It's probably easier just to demonstrate it than trying to, you know, use a translated set of these instructions and apply it to the unit. So let's flip the unit back over. And you see what's hidden under here is a set of controls. So there's 3 dials and 3 buttons. And basically the idea is you put it into the control mode. Let's see if it turns on. Now, this is where sometimes you can't even get this to power on unless you leave it for a minute or two just sitting in there with the battery compartment closed and it turned on. And sometimes I've noticed you have to turn all the calibration switches, and I don't know if this is just an age thing, all the way up. Once the calibration switches have gone all the way up, sometimes the meter powers on, and then you can adjust it to how you need it. So if I open this up, let's see if there's any life in it at the moment. So if I press this one, if this goes across, yes, there we go. This one is the one that should go to the middle. That's the 0. Z, that should go to Z. This one should go to the middle, and K should in theory go to K. But these two don't do that anymore. So basically, the logic is that you adjust these dials, and I'll do this off camera, and just give you a quick explanation, because as I said, this might take 5 minutes if I have to wait for it to warm up, like you do with a lot of these old units. The idea is that you adjust the Z one, so that when you press the Z button in, it lands on the Z there on the dial. You adjust the N one, which is the 0, so it should land directly in the middle of the dial, and obviously when not in use, it should be on 0, like most units, you know, zeroing it. And the K should line up with K. Now, from what I believe, the K is a circuit check, so basically the Z1 is like the battery check. I think the Z is basically saying that it should get to Z to tell you there's enough power going into the unit when Z is pressed. I don't know if it's allowed to go over Z, technically. With the, obviously, zeroing, it's meant to be on 0 all the time, except when you press the zeroing button, then it's meant to go to the very middle of the dial. And K is meant to be the same, that it will go to at least K. It might meant to be going further. But the idea is that when all the controls are calibrated and on all the right settings, you know, by doing that, you know the unit's ready to go without having a calibration source and everything else. Because obviously the point of strontium-90 in the original, for example, DP2, was that you could zero the unit in theory in the field and know it was working. This doesn't have a scary control source in it, which is kind of a shame, but it does, you know, have a system. So if I just try and turn all these up to max, we'll see if that kicks the unit on quickly. Because sometimes what you see happen with this unit is it appears to not be doing anything, and then all of a sudden it comes to life, and then it works perfectly. Interestingly, I did buy this from a seller that claimed it didn't work, so it was cheap, and thankfully I got it working within about 5 minutes. What I can do, let me just try going through the scales, because sometimes when you put this on times 0.1, what ends up happening is it just springs to life for that reason. I've also sometimes found if you hold like Z down for a bit, you know, and then press all the buttons in essentially, it seems to stimulate the thing into life. That might not be the case, of course, when I'm trying to do a video on it, which would be annoying. Let's turn that all the way left and then all the way right. Let's turn this one all the way left and then all the way right. And let's turn this one all the way left and then all the way right. And then try again. Let me just hold this button down a minute. I can hear a bit of a electrical whine now. Right, yeah, I can definitely hear an electrical whine now, so I think we're in the process of getting it started up. So you might in a moment see a bit more activity on the needle, because I can hear it whirring up a bit. But anyway, what I'm going to do now, this isn't going to be any camera trickery. I'm not changing the batteries or anything, because they were fully charged before putting them in. I'm just going to play about with it for a couple more minutes and let it wind up, because I'm sure you don't want to view 5 minutes of footage of me just mumbling on about it. You know, and then what I'll do is I'll demonstrate the unit in action. So all I'm literally going to do is keep going between control and ×1 on the scale, and, you know, get it to go to life by just, you know, pressing the buttons and doing all that sort of stuff. I believe that instruction says underneath, take the batteries out or turn it off when not in use. But yeah, basically this was the problem with old ionisation chamber units, as you may know from the early Cold War. They're not very fast at sort of powering up and sort of working. They're very good for giving you a dose reading, because as I said, it's not a Geiger counter, it's an ionisation chamber. They're very good at giving accurate dose readings once you're sort of in the dose ranges they're meant to display, compared to Geiger counters and, you know, being quite sturdy bits of equipment, but quite often they are very slow to sort of power up and calibrate. Some of them have quite drifty needles as well. So I said I'll go back to control. And what I'm also going to do now is obviously mess about with this a bit off camera, just because obviously the battery test is working, so we can see that bit's coming to life. And I can hear a whine coming on again. So what I'm going to do is just keep playing about with this off camera until it's powered on properly and I can demonstrate it, because that's going to be pretty boring to look at. If you're wondering about the scales and you don't know how to read these, there's a times 0.1, ×1, ×10, ×100. The scale is 0 to 3 Rontgen on that scale. So times 0.1 means 0, 50 millirontgen, 100 millirontgen, 200 millirontgen, 300 millirontgen. On the ×1 scale, it's as it says, 0, 1, 2, 3 Rontgen. On the times 10 scale, 10, 20, 30 Rontgen, times 100, 100, 200, 300 Rontgen. So this has both a lower end and a higher range than the DP2, but, you know, it is a clunkier unit than the DP2. If I just get the DP2 out so you can see both of them quickly, let me just zoom that out a bit. If I get the DP2 for scale, there we go. As you can hopefully see, the DP2 is, although it's of similar depth to the Polish unit, it's definitely not as wide. So yes, the DP2 is basically the unit this was designed to replicate. Although the ranges, as I said, this is 220 and 200 Rontgen, as opposed to sort of 300, 330 and 300 Rontgen. So, you know, it does a higher range, which is good, you know, lower and higher range. But anyway, I'll let you know how long it took roughly when I get this thing to come to life. Okay, so after a couple of minutes, the unit seems to have enough power to power on. I did twist the switches a bit further right than they're meant to go, some of the calibration ones, so it could be a case of they weren't quite twisting correctly in the housing. So let's go over the calibration controls quickly. So first, I imagine what we're meant to do is turn the 0 down till the needle is pretty much at 0. Although, if it looks like if it drops off entirely, you've gone too far, because it looks like then there's not enough power going to the unit. So, let's leave it there just right of 0, and then press the button. Right, that's going close enough to the middle, but what I'm just going to do is put this a bit further right, and then try it again and hope it goes to the actual middle point. It's close again, but not quite where it's meant to be. Let's try the Z button. Right, the Z is barely putting any oomph in at all. I think the Z is like power step up, isn't it? I'm just going completely off like my own sort of notes of trying to understand this device. And the K doesn't work properly on this one either, but again, that's because this one's an old device. But the main one is getting that to go to the middle roughly, and getting it, I'm just going to turn the 0 up a bit more. Basically what I want to do is, if I can have it going like that, I can at least demonstrate it working to some degree. So let me go on to the lowest scale. And then what I want to do now is see if I press the buttons if it does anything. So that's still going roughly to the middle. That might just not be going quite to the middle yet, because it might still not have built up enough power in its own reserves, or however it works. So that's that. The K, if I press K in, that should induce current into the system, but it's not working. Yeah, what you end up seeing is after this is turned on for a while, how I normally turn this on, if I've been playing with it, is to put it onto the lowest scale, let it power up till the needle's just all over the place, and then when it's doing that you can seem to adjust the dial so the zeroing goes to about 0, but it seems to respond to actual radiation stimulus. So at the moment, as you can see, the dial isn't completely on 0, which makes me think it is sort of working. If I press Z, yeah, that's putting a bit of life into that needle, not very much, and if I press K, that doesn't seem to be doing anything. Let me see if I can do another full revolution of K. As I said, these aren't sort of ideal dials. It's sort of, the idea is that these turn the internal bits. You know, they could always be misaligned, I guess, on the buttons. But anyway, let's see if I can demonstrate it anyway, because that would be a bit more interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the camera viewfinder around once I've got the thing directly on the unit. So let's zoom that in so you can see the dial nice and clearly and the scale. So we're on times 0.1 scale. Let me turn the viewfinder around, get behind it now, and see if on the viewfinder I can see it working without giving myself an electric shock. Now I might want to get my pliers if I've left them in this room. Yes, I have, because that's a much safer way of doing this with insulated pliers so I don't shock myself. Because I'm sure you know with units like this there's always a problem that if you get your hand too close to the ionisation chamber, it zaps your hand because of how these work. So right, we'll use the Americinium 241 on the card as usual for stimulating ionisation chambers, and let's first take this not quite into the chamber. There we go, there's life coming into the chamber as you can see. Ooh, it's gone off scale. So yeah, the weird thing with this is I'll just spin this around and show you quickly. I've just taken the sample away again. Is that this ionisation chamber is nowhere near as big as the actual external ionisation chamber's box. And I think the only reason for that is to shield the ionisation chamber itself from some of the electronic things in the device, as far as I'm aware. I don't know if that makes any sense how I've explained it. But basically I think it's just so all the step-up circuitry and any of the vacuum tubes or whatever used in the device itself don't interfere with the ionisation chamber. Right, so let's try this again with the pliers. I know this is, like I was saying, this is right of 0, but let's just leave it there for the time being because it's actually working. Bring the check source in. Oop, there we go, off scale. Take it away. There we go. So, right, now let's turn it onto the next scale, which is a bit difficult to do. Is it this way I want to turn it? Backwards. Right, so this should drop down further because this is now, I've not got the source near it, so hopefully, is the needle going to settle anywhere? Right, it looks like the needle's sort of settling at 0 Rontgen, which is quite good. So maybe this scale at least is playing ball. So right, let's bring the check source back in. So this is roughly where it was on the previous scale. There we go. And that's, yeah, showing that 3 Rontgen. Bring it back in. Take it away. Bring it in. Take it away. Bring it in. Take the check source away. Bring it in. There we go. Right, now let's put it up to the 30 Rontgen scale. Which way am I going? That way? Yep. So times 10 scale, so if this was calibrated correctly, which it probably isn't, 3 would mean 30 Rontgen. So we'll let the needle fall as low as it's going to fall naturally again. Bear in mind, any moisture or whatever getting inside the ionisation chamber is still going to sort of play about a bit with this. Right, so let's try again. This is roughly where I had it before. Is the needle going to move? I don't know if this is one of those ion chambers where some bits are more sensitive than others. I think the needle's moving a bit beyond 0 there, isn't it? But it's not moving as high as it was previously. So let me bring this in as close as I can without causing a short circuit. Right. So that's settling there. Let me just see if I can get that. Right, that might be shorting it a bit there. I'm not sure if the americinium is touching the thing. Let me just try and... Right, that's probably as best I can get the sample inside its actual ionisation chamber. So that's settling there on about 15 Rontgen, is it? Going between 15 and 20 Rontgen. Again, I don't think the calibration on this is completely correct. When I've had this turned on for about an hour previously and then done tests with it, I've had it read very similar with the same sources next to the DP2. So I'd assume this is pretty accurate. If you probably have fully charged batteries in it, you leave it on for quite a bit to dry out. Obviously in theory you shouldn't be running it like I'm running it with the bottom bit open. But as I said, the bottom bit was rusty and I actually wanted to demonstrate this because I've obviously, for safety reasons and legal reasons and whatever, I don't randomly have gamma sources that can go high enough to register on like a multi-Rontgen scale. If you're watching a random YouTube video where somebody isn't in a science lab and they can actually get gamma readings as high as this, I'd be seriously worried. But this is just done with an alpha source inside the ionisation chamber that you can see people do on experiments with tin cans of electrical wires on, interestingly enough. So let's just wiggle that about a bit in there. What I want to do is just try the outer section of the ionisation chamber. Does that do anything? Oh, does that actually respond there? That's interesting. So maybe the ionisation chamber does work on the outer wall as well. I'm just trying to figure out how this is set up then. Because I don't quite get why there's an inner block, then a metal block, and then an outer block, if they all respond. But if it works, it works. I've never noticed that before. So if I go down a scale, it should go off scale. Let's just try that. I've gone up a scale, haven't I, there? So we go that way. So that should peak at 3, if this is going to give the same reading on this one. So, yep, that's gone off scale at 3. You can see it hovering around the 3 area. So weirdly, that is like 3.6 Rontgen where the scale goes off. Although you can see this is pretty, you know, this chamber, as you can obviously see, the power calibration on it isn't quite right, because as you can see, it's jumping all over the place. Now, I know ionisation chambers do kind of do this. But yeah, what I'm going to do is just pull the sample out, and it should at least then go completely down to 0. Yeah, that's working. So cool. Hopefully this has demonstrated that these Polish D-08 meters, they're a bit old and clunky, as you can obviously see, but they do somewhat work. So if I just put this switch, it's really hard doing this in a viewfinder in reverse, onto the control one again, let's see what these numbers are giving off. I'm just going to squeeze around here so I can see my own face. Yeah, that's going to roughly where it should go to. But yeah, the others are definitely falling short. I am going to just double check after this video that the batteries are obviously fully charged as they should be. Also, rechargeable batteries are 1.2 volts. This is designed for free 1.5 volt batteries, which might cause a problem. It's definitely worked very well on Duracell cells before, but obviously once you've had them in a while, it drains them. But anyway, I do like this detector. It's a pretty cool thing. As said, you know, the problem is this is a very old unit. I've kind of modified it by taking the bottom off, which does mess with the conductivity of ion chambers a bit. But at least that way I can demonstrate it working, especially because this was sold as a broken unit, you know, and it definitely does respond to alpha radiation, which I've noticed. But yeah, if this is still running, I'll put the sample by it one more time, and what we should now see is, as I bring this in with the pliers, the needle should move, assuming that the unit is still powered on. I did put the switch the right way, didn't I, to be powered on? Yeah, it is on 0.1. Let's try again. Are we going to get any needle movement? No, I think the power's gone again from it. And again, this is probably the irritating thing with this system, is that I think with this, you have to have the dials at like a minimum setting for it to actually kind of work, because otherwise you see the needle sort of suddenly drop off. Yeah. I don't know if that's working again, but I'll just bring it in one more time to see if we get any reaction to it. But as you can see, the unit does somewhat work, and if you calibrated it all properly again, I think it would work properly. But bringing the sample in, I think there's a bit of needle movement there, isn't there, on the viewfinder? But not as much as you'd expect, because obviously it's not quite calibrated properly. But yeah, as you can see, the unit does somewhat work, and it's a cool piece of history. This came with a big box, which I won't bother showing in this video now. But inside the box was a little really retro flashlight, which was obviously because this unit doesn't have an internal light bulb. So you were just given a torch in the box of the unit, which I thought was pretty funny. It had an instruction manual, which is pretty interesting. You can find scans of those online. And it had a couple of old, crusty, obsolete batteries sitting in some of the bits of it. But it was in one of those really nice old box briefcases, and the really cool thing was I bought this from Poland prior to Christmas, and it was on economy delivery of about £15 for like the 8 kilo box, which was huge. It came in, and it got to me in about a week, so very good to the seller who sold it me, especially because they said it didn't work, so it was, you know, I guess cheaper than what they'd normally sell them for. Or maybe it's the thing of, you know, they're not going to go and check every single surplus bit of item, so they just say it doesn't work so people don't complain. Because I suppose, you know, if you're a surplus seller, if you say it doesn't work and then it works, that's a better result than saying it works and then somebody saying, oh, it didn't work exactly as I expected, I want a refund. There you go. Polish D-08 ionisation chamber. As you can see, it is an ionisation chamber. If you don't know how these work, I'll just flick the unit off before I do this, in case I cause a short. But with an ionisation chamber, that is basically how they normally work. You've got a central part, you've got an anode and a cathode. Basically it's the voltage between two plates. When you have electrons or whatever, ionisation of the air through, you know, alpha, helium atoms, sort of positrons or whatever they are, electrons or neutral things like with neutrons or whatever, although not all of them are obviously neutron sensitive, or, you know, gamma rays, the idea is that when they go inside an ionisation chamber, the electrical current difference, or the interference of the electrical current, causes the meter to take a reading. So again, this isn't a Geiger counter, because again, a lot of people incorrectly label ionisation chambers as Geiger counters, and if you bought one of these expecting a clickety-click radiation detector, you'd be disappointed. And, you know, if you didn't know what an ionisation chamber did, you'd probably not think they were as good as Geiger counters, but they actually are very useful in their own right. They just work in a different way, and, you know, have different uses. Like, you wouldn't use a spade to, you know, I suppose rake your lawn. You could do, but it wouldn't be very efficient, you know, and you wouldn't use a rake to dig a hole. It's that kind of thing. They work in different ways. But then, anyway, hope you found this video interesting. This is an old sort of Cold War relic. And again, this is what happens when you have a Warsaw Pact country that didn't want to pay the Soviet Union a production license, it seems. They come up with their own interesting design that probably isn't as good as the DP2 in all reality, even though it has more ranges. But it's a pretty cool unit nonetheless.